Think you've uncovered every dark corner of horror cinema? Think again. Some films don't scream. They whisper into the void, into obscurity, into vaults locked tighter than your memory. They appeared in a handful of theaters or late-night VHS aisles, then vanished. No press, no encore, no explanation. You won't find them on streaming platforms. You won't stumble across a remastered Blu-ray. These aren't cult classics, they're cultural ghosts. Films that didn't fail, but were perhaps never meant to be found again. Why were they buried? Was it poor marketing or something more deliberate? Stories circulate about directors who demanded their films be destroyed, about prints that disappeared without trace, about test screenings that ended in silence. Today, we unseal that vault. From haunted reels to cursed productions, these are 15 horror films that surfaced quietly and then dissolved into myth. Not forgotten because they were bad, but because someone didn't want them remembered. Let's step into the shadows of the unseen. Hasson, the amusement park, 1973. A disoriented elderly man enters an amusement park. He expects joy. He finds horror. Commissioned by the Lutheran Service Society as an educational film about elder abuse, the amusement park was never intended to terrify. But in the hands of George A. Romero, it became something else entirely. A descent into societal cruelty disguised as family fun. Shot in broad daylight among real park-goers, the film's bright palette only amplifies the dread. Seniors are ignored, mocked, shoved, priced out, and finally consumed by bureaucracy, by time, by us. The camera never blinks. The screams are always just out of frame. After one internal screening, the project was shelved. Too disturbing, too real. It wouldn't be seen again for nearly 50 years. This is not metaphorical horror. This is us. This is now. This is what happens when we mistake empathy for weakness and pretend the carousel never ends. #2. The Astrologer, 1975. Not to be confused with the cult sci-fi of the same name, this astrologer is harder to find and far stranger. A government psychic begins investigating a series of murders tied to celestial alignments. What he uncovers is a web of occult power, CIA interference, and a truth written in the stars, one that stares back. The Astrologer is disorienting by design. Scenes bleed into each other. Dialogue repeats like mantras. Editing shifts time, perspective, and meaning deliberately. Some claim it was re-edited after its limited release due to viewer confusion. Others say the film was never meant to be linear or human. The sound mix is uneven, the colors oversaturated, the plot barely coherent, and yet it feels like prophecy, like a film made by something using cinema as a transmission device. It was released quietly, then vanished. Almost no reviews, no home video, only whispers, and the rumor that the stars in the opening sequence were real celestial events, ones tied to deaths. This isn't a movie, it's a signal. #3. The Child, 1977. She's small, she's quiet, and she speaks to the dead. In the outskirts of 1942nd, California, a nanny takes a job watching over an eerie young girl. The girl's mother has died. The girl's father is distant. And some things are crawling in from the woods at night. The child unfolds in a haze of grain and shadow. The performances are stiff, almost stagey, but that's what makes it worse. Everyone feels like they're trapped in someone else's dream, moving on cue, saying lines they didn't choose. And the girl, she never breaks character. The horror isn't loud. It's slow, shambling, inevitable. Dead things move strangely, eyes glow in the dark, and the girl smiles like she knows she won't have to lift a finger to hurt you. Released under various titles, poorly marketed, The Child never found a home. Perhaps it was too quiet, or perhaps it showed us something we weren't ready to name. That innocence, when cracked, becomes the most terrifying mask of all. #4. The Passing, 1983. Two elderly men volunteer for a radical life extension experiment. But instead of youth, they find memory fractures, body horror, and the disturbing realization that their pasts are not entirely their own. The Passing is not your typical horror film. It's quiet, meditative, shot over years on a shoestring budget. It blends sci-fi, mortality, and the uncanny with a restraint that feels almost sacred. There are no monsters, only men losing themselves. The tone is funereal, lighting is stark, sometimes institutional. Flashbacks bleed into hallucinations. Dreams decay into confessionals. When the experiment begins, it doesn't feel like progress. It feels like a slow, surgical erasure of identity. It's a horror of disappearance, of self, of memory, of purpose. What if the thing you tried to escape by cheating death was already inside you? The passing played once, briefly, in a few underground circuits. Then it was gone. Even its digital restorations feel haunted, like the image never wants to fully render. Some films vanish. This one feels like it's vanishing as you watch. #5. Premonition, 1972. A college student begins having vivid visions of death, his own, and others. The problem? The visions aren't warnings, they're invitations. Premonition unfolds like an open wound. Barely explained, utterly bleak. It deals not in exposition but in sensation, how dread builds inside the body, how fate can feel like déjà vu, how horror is sometimes just knowing. It moves slowly, like something stalking you in a mirror. The acting is raw, unrefined, intentionally so. You're not watching characters. You're watching people fall apart under a force that offers no reason, no escape, and no climax. Cinematography is washed in earthy browns and bruised blues, each frame like a Polaroid pulled from a fire. Sound design favors droning winds, sudden silences, and low, animalistic breathing often before anything actually happens. Premonition barely registered upon release. Its reels were shuffled, renamed, misfiled. For years, collectors argued whether it ever truly existed. But every now and then, someone finds a tape, and they all say the same thing. It felt personal. #6. Lamora, A Child's Tale of the Supernatural, 1973. She's young, devout, and alone. Her father, a gangster-turned-monster, disappeared into the woods. Now she follows, deeper into a southern Gothic nightmare where nothing is innocent, least of all, her. Lamora feels like a fevered fairy tale gone septic. Fog-choked roads, candlelit cathedrals, pale women with fangs that barely smile. The entire film pulses with a sickly stillness, as if God turned his gaze away and something else looked in. It's a vampire story, but never straightforward. Time melts, dialogue echoes. Lamora the figure, the presence offers protection and perversion in equal measure. The child becomes the hunted, then the chosen, then something else entirely. Lamora was shelved upon release, deemed blasphemous and too immoral for distribution. Only in bootleg circles did it find breath again. Watching it feels like unlocking a diary that should have stayed buried. This isn't just a lost film. It's a spell never meant to be spoken twice. #7. Messiah of Evil, 1973. In a seaside town swallowed by moonlight, the locals stop blinking. They stare too long, they speak too softly, and they're all waiting for something beneath the waves. Messiah of Evil is visual poetry wrapped in rot. A woman searches for her missing father and instead uncovers a slow infection of the soul. The town is beautifully dead. Neon supermarkets lit like morgues, art galleries echoing with blood, and churches that preach nothing. The film moves like a dream you're not sure you want to remember. Its horror lies in gestures, the way someone eats raw meat in public, or how crowds gather with perfect silence. It doesn't build, it lingers. Infects. There are sequences here, one in a movie theater, another in a grocery aisle, that belong in the canon of true nightmare logic. And yet, Messiah of Evil was almost lost. Poor distribution, no advertising, a title forgotten in the tide of louder film. But if you listen closely, you can still hear it whispering through the static of forgotten reels. #8. Don't Go in the House, 1979. His mother burned him for thinking dirty thoughts. Now he's grown and the basement is full of flame-proof chains. He invites women home, politely. They never leave. Don't Go in the House is a psychological inferno, not just about murder, but about damage passed down like inheritance. The protagonist isn't a slasher villain, he's a furnace of unresolved trauma, and the film never lets you look away from the embers. The kills are brutal, but static. No dramatic music, no camera shake, just heat, screams, and silence. The horror here isn't suspense, it's inevitability. The sense that this fire has been waiting to burn for years. Released with minimal promotion, it was quickly banned in several countries. The few who saw it in theaters left disturbed, not because of what they saw, but because of how quiet it all was. Sometimes, the house isn't haunted. Sometimes, it's just waiting for the match. #9. Deathbed, The Bed That Eats, 1977. A four-poster bed, forgotten in an abandoned manor, quietly digests its victims. Not metaphorically, literally. Flesh, bone, soul, it swallows them all, without a sound. Yes, the title is absurd, but Deathbed is not a joke. It plays like a fevered hallucination, dreamlike voiceovers, ghostly narrators trapped behind walls, and a sentient piece of furniture that exudes dread more than gore. Shot on 16mm with a budget scraped together from shadows, the film feels like it was never meant to be seen. Lighting shifts without reason, edits stutter, time loops, and yet its surreal tone is hypnotic, like watching someone confess a nightmare they barely survived. The movie sat unreleased for years, lost in legal limbo and decaying film stock. Only whispers of its existence kept it alive until a battered print resurfaced decades later. A horror film so strange, it was nearly eaten by the void it created. Hasson 0, The Witch Who Came from the Sea, 1976. She walks along the California shore, her voice honeyed, her memories sharp. But not all of them are hers, and when the blood begins to spill, she swears she's only setting things right. The Witch Who Came from the Sea is not the film its title suggests. There are no witches in the traditional sense, just a woman, fractured by trauma, wrapped in sun-bleached dreams and TV static. The horror here is internal, violent, erotic, and deeply uncomfortable. The film cuts between pastel beachscapes and brutal murders with disorienting grace. Nothing is ever fully explained. Everything is submerged beneath symbolism, repression, and ache. Actress Millie Perkins gives a performance too raw for comfort, every word laced with seduction and sorrow. Censorship nearly drowned this film. It was caught in the UK, video nasty panic, slapped with bans and cut reels. But even in its surviving form, it radiates unease. To watch it is to wonder what was taken out and what was never meant to be seen in the first place. Hasson. Dark August, 1976. After a tragic accident on a rural Vermont road, a man becomes the target of a curse. But the curse isn't theatrical, it's slow, creeping. It waits inside the trees, behind his reflection, inside his skin. Dark August thrives on atmosphere. There are no jump scares, only long silences and subtle shifts, shadows where there shouldn't be, feelings that don't belong. The protagonist's descent isn't overt. He frays at the edges, like film burning in reverse. Shot with grainy natural light and heavy use of location sound, it feels less like a movie and more like a found diary of someone unraveling. The local witch character, earthy and unreadable, becomes both guide and question mark. She offers help, but never comfort. It's a film that resists interpretation. Viewers argue whether the curse is even real. But those who've seen it describe a feeling that stays after the credits, like walking into a fog and realizing something walked out with you. Dark August was released quietly, then sank even quieter. No remaster, no restoration. Maybe that's for the best. Hasson 2, The Evil, 1978. A decaying mansion perched on a New Mexico hillside. An underground vault sealed for decades. When a group of psychologists breaks it open, something that was waiting is now free. The Evil begins like a haunted house procedural but quickly descends into madness. The architecture groans with history, stone corridors, wrought iron doors, air that seems to thicken with every step. A sulfuric presence stalks the guests, not as a specter, but as force. Invasive, intelligent, cruel. The film was marketed as a typical possession flick, but it doesn't follow the rules. The evil here isn't content to haunt it. Plays, tempts, mocks. Characters aren't merely victims. They're drawn into something ritualistic, as if the house itself demands roles be played out again and again. For all its low-budget constraints, The Evil captures a kind of existential terror, an abyss that talks back. The kind of horror that asks, if evil is a place, what happens when you unlock its door? The film aired on TV a handful of times, and then stopped. Some prints degrade, some never made it out of vaults. A movie about opening the wrong door that seems to have shut itself for good. Hasson 3, Ruby, 1977. She was a mobster's mole once. Now Ruby runs a drive-in theater in the Florida swamps. But the dead have a way of calling home, especially when the projector starts rolling. Ruby is drenched in Southern Gothic decay. Blood-soaked memories seep into the screen as Ruby's daughter, silent and telepathic, begins to unravel. Lights flicker, specters linger, and then the reel clicks, revealing more than just a forgotten film. What begins as a 1,950 seconds ghost story veers hard into telekinesis, possession, and the rage of the unliving. The atmosphere is thick with mildew and nostalgia, like old film stock gone moldy. Piper Laurie's performance turns melodrama into menace, each line delivered like a seance. Ruby feels cursed in its construction, disjointed edits, rumors of studio interference, and an alternate ending lost to time. Maybe that's why it never caught on. Or maybe something wanted it buried. And still, sometimes the static between channels feels like her whisper. Hasson 4, The Severed Arm, 1980. 973. Buried alive by mistake, a man is forced to endure unthinkable horror. Years later, the friends who left him there begin receiving packages. Cold, bloody, severed. The severed arm wastes no time setting up its primal fear: isolation, dismemberment, guilt. The premise is simple, but the execution is unnerving. Stark lighting, heavy silences, and close-up shots of sweaty paranoia make every moment drip with discomfort. The killer is never just the killer. The film suggests something rotten among the survivors, something worse than revenge, something feeding off the guilt itself. For a movie with such a grindhouse-sounding title, it's remarkably restrained. No flashy gore, just dread, pacing like a predator, and a sense that the true horror isn't in what they did, but what they were willing to do to survive. This is the kind of movie that disappears because no one wants to look at what it's actually saying. Hasson 5. Nightmare in Blood, 1978. In a fog-drenched San Francisco theater, a horror film convention becomes far too literal when guests begin vanishing. The host, a silent figure with a love for B-movies and a thirst that feels all too real. Nightmare in Blood plays like a tribute to classic monster flicks until the tribute turns twisted. A washed-up horror actor, an underground network of vampire hunters, and a theater that feels more like a tomb combine in a story that feels both familiar and utterly off-kilter. The low-budget grit only adds to the surreal atmosphere, like watching someone else's nightmare bleed into your own. What's most unsettling is how Nightmare in Blood seems to know it's being watched, breaking the fourth wall, not with dialogue, but with dread. The final act spirals into something disorienting, almost self-aware, and then it ends. Released barely, screened rarely, remembered faintly. A film about monsters that perhaps revealed too much about the real ones behind the curtain. Bonus pick. Before we wrap, here are 3 more horror films you need to add to your list. But let's be honest, this one you probably can't find. And if you do, watch it alone. The Intruder, 1975. A man checks into a crumbling boarding house. No one else seems to be there, at least no one visible. Shot on faded Super 8, The Intruder is a Canadian ghost story that plays like a sleep paralysis hallucination. The camera rarely moves, rooms feel still but not empty, doors open slower than they should, clocks tick out of sync, and every footstep feels one beat too close. There is no gore, no music, just a man, a hallway, and something that waits outside the frame. Whispers creep in under the dialogue, sometimes reversed, sometimes in children's voices. They say it's the real degrading. Others disagree. What little is known of The Intruder comes from collectors' forums and secondhand screenings. No studio has claimed it. No director has stepped forward. It is referenced in film zines from the 80 seconds, but always vaguely, as if afraid to name it directly. The final scene, never confirmed, only described allegedly, cuts to black mid-breath. Some say the film itself is cursed. Others say it was an art experiment gone wrong. But those who've seen it agree on one thing: it's not about what's in the house. It's about what watches you when you leave. If you're drawn to the shadows where stories fade, reels rot, and whispers replace memories, then you've found the right place. There are more films like these, forgotten, hidden, or perhaps buried for a reason. We'll keep digging, and if you're still watching, maybe you will too.